Do you know the song? There's a song by The Clash that works perfectly for this topic. I'm going to take away the topic bar for a second. Will they stay or will they go?
No, I don't know that song.
You don't know should I stay or should I go?
No.
Oh, wow. Anyway, will the Cleveland Browns stay in their current stadium or are they going to build a new one? This issue has come to the forefront again because the Haslams made it perfectly clear they're either going with option A, which is remodeling Cleveland Browns Stadium, and that would not include a dome, or option B, moving to Brook Park by Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, and that would be a dome. So there's pros and cons to both of these plans, obviously. My personal preference would be to leave downtown, head to Brook Park, build a dome. Here's why. When you look across the landscape at a lot of these dome stadiums, what kind of events are they bringing in? The Super Bowl, WrestleMania, Men's College Basketball Final Four. Cleveland recently has been getting some of these bigger events. We got the 2019 MLB All-Star Game, 2021 NFL Draft, 2022 NBA All-Star Game. This year we're getting the 2024 Women's Final Four. And we're getting SummerSlam, as you alluded to. So Cleveland is starting to get these bigger events. However, because we don't have a domed stadium, we can't get WrestleMania, we can't get the Men's Final Four, and we can't get the Super Bowl. But if we had the dome, Cleveland could potentially get those events. Now, I understand with WrestleMania, they're going to Philadelphia in a couple weeks, which is an open-air stadium. But usually, WrestleMania tends to be at a dome stadium, whether it's New Orleans or Dallas. I've heard there's talks about maybe Minnesota getting WrestleMania next year. That's a dome stadium. So that's my point. And with the Super Bowl, yeah, it's been in Florida, at Tampa Bay and Miami, and it's been out in San Francisco, but it usually is in a dome stadium. This coming season, it's going to be in New Orleans. Recently, it was in Atlanta. SoFi just recently hosted a Super Bowl. That's a dome stadium. Allegiant Stadium, that's a dome stadium. And with the Men's Final Four, Arizona is hosting it this year. That's a dome. Minnesota is hosted it recently. That's a dome stadium. You get my point. If you want these bigger events, you need to have a dome.
So, while I agree on all of Josh's points, and because I do, I'm going to take this from a different direction because I agree with you. I prefer the dome stadium as well, and for the exact reasons that you had mentioned. So, I'm going to take it from a Cleveland Browns or a football fan, if you will, point of view, because for those of you that don't know, first of all, Brook Park is in a suburb of Cleveland. So as I alluded to a couple weeks ago, it would be like where the Buffalo Bills Stadium is in Orchard Park, which is essentially a suburb in Buffalo. And I do think that the only reason why fans do not want to see a dome stadium is because we talked about this. I don't remember if me and Josh had talked about this on Championship Rings. I know I mentioned it on Brand's Word in the past. I think, and this is no bias because we live in the Cleveland area, but I think the Cleveland Browns fans are the best fans in all of sports for the misery, for the suffering that they have gone through. And you can't even include the Detroit Lions now because they're actually good and they made the NFC Championship game.
That's surprising coming from you because you're also a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
Well, the Eagles have been a very good football. I've said this to friends of mine that are Browns fans. A 7-9 year, or 7-10 if you want to say it now, because obviously it's 17 game schedule. 7 wins for the Eagles in the season is an abject failure. 7 wins for the Browns 10 years ago was celebrating a goddamn parade.
Yes, but Browns fans didn't throw snowballs at Santa on Christmas.
And Eagles fans did not host a parade for being 0-16. So there's that. But I do think the only reason why Cleveland fans are not fully embracing the dome is because there are these old school minded Browns fans that say we need to be in the cold. Football is meant to be played in the cold. Cold weather is an advantage in December. And while I do understand that point of it, if you have actually looked historically over the past decade, we may have had like the Buffalo game against Pittsburgh is actually an anomaly. And we have not had that many snow or cold weather games. You may get them now once a year. And sometimes they're not even that big of a factor. I mean, the Saints, if you remember a Christmas Eve game 2 years ago, a freezing cold game in Cleveland. They're an indoor team, obviously. They came outside to Cleveland and they kicked the Browns' tail. So, in a way, I think it helps. I also think it's a little bit overrated. And there are many cold teams. Minnesota, great example. Detroit, another example, that have had domes. Yeah, that have had domes for years and have never, that I have heard, complained about, the fact football should be played in the cold and yada, yada, yada. I think more stadiums are going to be designed this way to have at least retractable roofs in the warmer weather cities, Arizona, Texas, LA, where the heat is just so hot. You almost have to have some sort of a dome, specifically in Arizona's case, because fans are going to melt if you don't have a retractable roof.
Right.
So in that regard, I do think that if I had to guess right now, I think that there will be a dome built. I'll say within the next decade. I'll go very conservative, and maybe the next half decade. I think the Browns would continue playing at the current location, Cleveland Browns Stadium, until said dome is built. I don't think they would just tear down the stadium and have the Browns play somewhere else like the Vikings had to when obviously the Metrodome collapsed and things like that. But I do think within the next decade, you're going to see a dome stadium in Cleveland. I think you're going to see a potential WrestleMania announced, the Final Four, and other events that Josh had mentioned earlier.
Yes. And the one thing I wanted to say before we move on is you think about a dome, like when you watch that Rams-Lions game during the NFC wild card, it got extremely loud in there. And when you go to a Vikings game, when they're doing that skull chant, skull, like that, it's really loud in there. So
it is, though it's not intimidating because they're playing the Vikings, and what have they won in their franchise history? But
right, but still, like that could give the Browns an advantage because Browns fans are some of the most raucous fans in the NFL already. And if you put them in a dome, that's just going to make the sound even louder.